their own place in eternity and how they will be judged. Now, this is a temptation that we must reject. It's absolutely necessary that we reject this temptation to despair. To encourage us, let us remember Jesus encountering the rich young man in the 19th chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew. The rich young man first of all approaches Jesus and calls him good. But Jesus rebukes him. Not because Jesus isn't good, but because he recognizes that the young man approaches him as a human teacher and calls him good. Jesus makes it clear, if you approach him thinking him good, but don't accept his divinity, you are in error. So all those in the world who claim that Jesus teaches good things, but they don't believe he's God, or believe he's a prophet or a holy man, but he isn't divine, they are in error. And Jesus has made this clear, that the good works of men are like dirty rags before the goodness of God. No one is good but God. Jesus is good because he is God, he is divine. Human goodness is as wickedness before God. And then the rich young man, when questioned by Jesus, claims that he's kept the commandments all his life. A little like the modern day Protestants who claim that they are saved because they think a certain way about God. Well, he believes he has kept all of the commandments. But Jesus draws him into the truth of his condition, because the rich man is very wealthy and the possessions that he has have a kind of tyranny over him. But more than this, if he claims to have kept the commandments, then he will have loved his neighbor as himself. How can any rich man say he has loved his neighbor as himself if his neighbor goes hungry? That is not love. And Jesus draws it out of him and says, "Go, sell everything you have, give it to the poor." And the young man leaves disheartened. And in response to this, he turns to the disciples and Jesus says, "It is so difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, more difficult than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle." We don't need to concern ourselves whether he meant a little camel or the great ropes that may be referred to as a camel. The point is the difficulty of the rich entering heaven. And the disciples turn to him and say, "Who then can be saved? Who then can be saved?" They ask this question not out of concern for themselves. They have abandoned their jobs, their fishermen, their fishing nets and their boats and their offices and work. They have made themselves poor to follow Jesus. And yet they say, "Who then can be saved?" because they are full of concern for other people. And Jesus says to them, "With man it is impossible. With God all things are possible." And this is what Orthodox Christians must hear when tempted to fall into despair, when tempted by this distortion about salvation. Because our salvation is not dependent on our sinfulness, on our weakness. We must not gauge our salvation by our weakness, but by the power and love of God. This is what we must base our hope in, not what we have done, for anything that we have done will be as dirty rags. When we see our sinfulness, when we recognize our weakness, we know we have nothing to offer to God. But we must hold on to hope, hope that is based on nothing but the mercy and love of God, nothing that we can do or have done. We must be like the tax collector standing beside the Pharisee, who goes before God, knowing he is a sinner. Not in false humility, he knows he is a sinner. And yet he approaches God, and he leaves justified, because God accepts him in his repentance and his humility. And we must have humility before God, recognizing what we truly are, the sinful creature we are, deserving of condemnation.